This program is Between Americans. That's where the title comes in. We hope you like it, but you don't have to. At any rate, nobody's going to make you stick around and listen to it. That's one of the advantages of being an American. We invite you to think that one over for a moment, and while you're exercising your inalienable right to tune us out or let us ride, we'll help ourselves to a little music. Maestro, the overture, please. Now that was an American composition, but boy, it sure did go all over the map, didn't it? But then mixing in different strains has never bothered real Americans. Not when we've got states named after French kings and English queens, or lifted right out of the Spanish language like Nevada, or out of ancient Latin like Montana. Or take Vermont. That's French for Green Mountain. For green, for mountain. They call it the Green Mountain State, don't they? You know, if we were to hold a convention of all the people who live in foreign-sounding American towns, we could fill quite a sizable stadium. Among the delegates registering on the first day would be...
Me. I'm the delegate from London, Minnesota.
I'm in from Dublin, California.
Whose turn? Me? I'm from Rome, Mississippi.
And I'm from Tokyo, Texas.
I came all the way from Shanghai, West Virginia.
And I live in Manila, Utah.
I'm here from Goshen, Indiana. And I hope you don't mind, my wife's deployed overseas, so I brought our son with me.
Hello. Oh, sorry, ma'am. I didn't mean to get in front of you.
It's all right. I'm the delegate representing Geneva, Washington State.
My town is Toronto, Kansas.
As for me, Lisbon, Maine.
Delegate from Madrid, Alabama, reporting.
My parents brought me from Stockholm, South Dakota.
Flew in this afternoon from Bombay, New York.
I drove here from Baghdad, Florida.
Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. You may all be seated. Now that's all the preliminaries there's going to be tonight. We're through with the introduction, the overture, and the official registration, so now we can get down to the text, which is, roughly speaking, this. People are thinking about their country pretty hard these days, some of them for the first time in their lives. People are wondering where we're headed, and being Americans, nobody can make them agree with anybody about everything or with everybody about anything. There's always been plenty of dissent in our country. It was founded by people who disagreed with their government, after all. And these days, arguments have been getting pretty loud and extremely passionate. Wherever you are, you can probably find people right in your own town who take a very different view of some very important things. Just what does America mean to them? and to you. Most Americans are solid patriots, only they don't know it. They don't have to wear a red, white, and blue cap to prove it, or come to attention every time they hear a patriotic tune. They don't have to agree with or even listen to people like this.
You know, but this is the only place you're going to really hear the truth, because I always tell the truth, and you know that. And you know I'm right. I'm always right, and the rights that we have are the rights I stand on. Where would America be without this great country of ours? It's self-evident.
We've got a good hunch most people prefer the quiet kind of speaker, like the fellow who got up on a platform in a Pennsylvania town one day and said,
"The world will little note, nor long remember, what we say here."
That was the Gettysburg Address, carved in marble today. As a matter of fact, it didn't get such good reviews the next morning. Take, for example, the write-up in the Harrisburg Patriot.
We pass over the silly remarks of the president. For the credit of the nation, we are willing they shall no more be repeated and thought of.
If you think that's bad, listen to what the Chicago Times had to say.
The cheek of every American must tingle with shame as he reads the silly, flat, and dishwatery utterances of the man who has to be pointed out to intelligent foreigners as the President of the United States.
Of course, the rival paper in Chicago, the Tribune, took the opposite point of view. Rival papers often do.
The remarks of President Lincoln will live among the annals of men.
The Trib gave it 4 stars, and they were right. The Gettysburg Address did survive. Now, that business of calling a president silly is really something to be proud of. I mean, the right to print a piece, saying a president makes it sound like dishwater? That's important. Nobody dragged those editors off to jail, even if they were wrong. Comes under the heading of free press. As soon as anybody starts gagging the press in any medium, watch out. Americans don't like that. And we've got a nerve to be calling ourselves Americans all the time when we're really only United Staters. We're a little selfish about that. Do you know that a citizen of Punta Arenas on the Strait of Magellan has as much right to America the Beautiful as you have? If any of you folks hear this program down in Mexico or Chile or up in Quebec, or even if you're an Inuit in the Arctic, we hope you'll overlook our calling ourselves Americans as though we're the only ones in the hemisphere. We do that just because it's so much easier to say than anything else, and also because it sounds so good. But before we leave the subject, what about the original Americans, the Native Americans? If we're going to be honest, their story doesn't sound so good. The peoples of the First Nations, who were here before any lines were drawn, are brave peoples, too often confronted with hatred, bigotry, and broken promises, and even shot down, starved out, and violently forced into exile by the waves of newcomers arriving from all over the world. They've been fighting a losing fight against great odds. The fight so many people of all countries have had to fight. The fight to keep their lives from being lived in fear. Today, we are all attacked by people who are trying to shove fear right in our faces. We call them terrorists, and we don't always know where they're coming from, in any sense of that phrase. But back during the Great Depression, a president of the United States said something we still remember.
The only thing we have to fear is fear itself.
Today, those who weaponize fear know that well, and they also know something the brilliant Chinese strategist Sun Tzu wrote 25 centuries ago.
One who knows the enemy and knows himself will not be endangered in 100 engagements. One who does not know the enemy but knows himself will sometimes be victorious, sometimes meet with defeat. One who knows neither the enemy nor himself will invariably be defeated.
You see what that means? If we want to defend ourselves against any attacker, We've got to know the truth about ourselves. That means asking some questions, hard questions, about what kind of people Americans really are. Would anybody care to try?
I would. Haven't Americans committed acts which even we would call terrorism?
Yes, we have. More often than we like to admit. Sometimes abroad, but sometimes right here at home.
Yes. I was thinking of mass shootings. Of kids in school, even. Kids like me. Wow.
This isn't something you should even have to think about.
That's
one of the worst.
That's terrorism, straight
I don't know
up.
if you ever had anything like that
no.
when I was growing up.
Someone should be able to do something about that.
That's awful. Well, we won't stop it
What
until we regulate
Better
guns.
think about it.
That kind of thing happened in this
There's nothing to
country.
say but shame.
Just horrible.
Oh, yes, horrible. But let me give you an even worse example. The first 5 generations of Americans lived in a country that officially permitted slavery. Slavery based on race, an evil so great that we are still trying to purge its insidious miasma from the minds of our children. In order to uproot that evil, we had to tear our country in half and fight a war that cost us far more in blood and treasure than any other war we've ever fought. But we did it.
It was historian George Santayana who said,
Those who do not remember history are condemned to repeat it.
I've heard that said. Here's what I say. September 11th, 2001. There's some history we don't ever want to repeat.
Remember Pearl Harbor? September 11th has been compared many times to December 7th, 1941. And what was World War II, really, but a war against terror? What were the Nazis and the Japanese militarists and all their also-ran imitators but terrorists? Terrorists who controlled whole countries. Hundreds of thousands marched to their tombs, brandishing weapons and gas chambers. Tens of millions believed their monstrous lies. Those terrorists had armies, navies, air forces, industries, banks filled with the loot of nations. Terror weapons? Oh, they had them all.
Suicide bombers? The Japanese launched thousands of kamikazes.
Chemical weapons? The Nazis stockpiled tons of nerve gas. But even they were afraid to unleash that horror.
Biological weapons? The Japanese had special bombs filled with bubonic plague and anthrax. They were ready to use them on us, but never did.
Nuclear weapons? The Nazis had a design for a dirty bomb and the materials to make it. Lucky for us, they didn't get it done in time.
Lucky for us. Pearl Harbor and 9/11 together killed 6,000 Americans, and we will never forget. But the war against history's worst terrorists devastated the world and cost us in America over 1 million casualties, more than 400,000 dead, defending our liberties. We'll never forget that either.
We gave up some of our liberties to fight that war, didn't we?
Well, yes, we did. For the duration. Of the war, that is.
Like some freedom of speech and information. Lots of things were secret.
Radio stations weren't even allowed to broadcast a weather report. But reporters still did their best to report the truth as they saw it about what was going on.
In wartime, people could accept things like that. But then we pretty much canceled the Bill of Rights for more than 100,000 Japanese Americans, not just legal immigrants, full citizens too, and forced them into internment camps, for the duration, to be sure. What do you all think of that?
Oh. Look, after Pearl Harbor, people were afraid some of those Japanese folks would be spies or, what's the word? Saboteurs, you know? Terrorists.
And we weren't marching them into gas chambers or anything. Those people had food and clothing and housing. Families could stay together. And the kids even had schools.
Oh, come on. Those crummy houses didn't even have plumbing. They had a hard life, and it wasn't right. The Supreme Court finally said it was unconstitutional.
Oh, yes, and they were released in 1945, and eventually we officially apologized and even gave $20,000 to each one we could find. Decades later. Those are all just excuses.
It happened because we were afraid. Afraid of people just because of how they were born, because they were different. Seems to me Roosevelt was right. The only thing we have to fear really is fear itself.
At least it teaches everybody a lesson African Americans have always known. It can happen here.
When the Second World War was over there, we said this over here.
We've learned that freedom isn't something to be won and then forgotten. It must be renewed, like soil after yielding good crops. Must be rewound, like a faithful clock. Exercised like a healthy muscle. Free men who forget that lose their freedom.
Do we still remember today how to exercise our freedom and keep it healthy?
It's not hard. Not really. We just have to do a little civil thinking every day. Pay attention. Don't just glance at a headline. Get the whole story.
And make up your own mind. Don't just decide who you're going to believe. Find out what the facts are and think about them.
Yes, trying to understand what's really true and what isn't. That's everybody's job.
And so's using our freedom of speech. Shoot your mouth off against the bad appointment or the stupid zoning decision.
Or sneaky ways to keep people from voting.
Standing up against hate speech.
Insisting that bad laws be changed.
And good ones enforced.
Voting in season.
And demanding of our representatives that they be representative.
If we don't do it, who will?
That's a good question. It reminds me of something that's been said by a lot of different people, including Emma Lazarus, John Fitzgerald Kennedy, and perhaps most famously by Dr. Martin Luther King Jr.
No one is free until we all are free.
Well, we've made some progress on that, haven't we? I mean, Lincoln issued the Emancipation Proclamation over 150 years ago.
But it took another century before we passed the Voting Rights Act.
And it's not just about African Americans. Let me remind you that in Lincoln's day, a wife was still considered to be the property of her husband. American women, half the population, weren't allowed to vote for another 50 years.
That's true. We have made some progress, and we shouldn't forget that. But we still have more to do, and we shouldn't forget that either. So, here's another good question. Americans will always defend their homes and families, but these days, are we really willing to take the time and do whatever needs doing to defend freedom for every American?
Well, I would like to think that we would.
We have to take care of each other.
But I don't know.
I do not think so.
Well, it depends on what you mean by freedom, doesn't it?
Think about that. What do you say?
We better, or we're in trouble.
Would you fight for someone you don't know?
freedom zone we talking
In this
about?
world today, people are living in such a selfish,
I'm not sure
selfish way.
Americans are defending the freedoms of every American.
I don't know.
Maybe just Americans that look like them.
Would you consider someone you don't agree with someone you would fight for?
I think that's a very good question.
We have to consider the bigger picture. Is everyone going to be protected?
Sometimes you just don't know.
That's a good question, though.
Are we Americans today less brave than the defenders of Valley Forge, Little Round Top, Belleau Wood, Bastogne, Poussin, Quezon, or Kabul?
I don't think so.
I certainly hope not.
No,
I
but
think we
it's
have
not
it in
the
us.
same anymore.
Absolutely not.
Our
You
military?
even have to ask someone.
My wife's an example of
We're
it.
as brave as we ever
Our
were.
military is just as brave as they've
So
ever
many
been.
people
I wonder about
are
that.
looking for somebody else to protect them.
You'll find some of the bravest people in our inner cities and in our rural communities.
Are we less hardy nowadays than the people who endured in Coventry or Manila or Stalingrad?
Jeez,
I should hope
I don't know.
I have a hard time picturing
That's a hard
that.
one.
I would like to think we would.
I don't know.
I think we're all a little softer.
Hard to tell,
I
really.
don't
We
know.
haven't had to do that.
I guess so.
We as Americans, we like the easy way, not the
We
hard
have
way.
gone
Don't worry
through
about
so
us.
much.
We'll get through.
We've forgotten how to endure through the hard
I
stuff.
think that people rise
We would do
to the
that.
situation that they're in.
I am not pessimistic about
I'm not sure.
people pulling together and that our strength comes in numbers.
It's hard to tell if you've not been through any of those tragedies.
History will always throw challenges at us.
We could get it back again, though.
Are we less dedicated to doing what's right than Ben Franklin or Harriet Tubman or Viola Liuzzo?
Heavens no.
I don't know.
I don't think so.
We are less dedicated in doing what's right.
I think it's hard.
I think it depends on who you're thinking of as we.
You know, I used to say no, but I have hope these days.
I don't think we're less dedicated. I think that
depends.
what's right looks different to different people.
Not everyone is agreed on what right is.
Is what's right based on a lie or based on the truth?
These days, I'm not so sure.
I think we have as strong convictions now because if you look at all the young people that are protesting,
Well,
you look at all the things that are being reformed.
When we think we are doing right, we defend it to the mat.
Look at what happens when people find a cause and something to join each other to rise up again.
Well, sure.
Or in favor of.
We are more dedicated than ever.
Guess so.
It was Ben Franklin who wrote way back in 1759,
"Those who would give up essential liberty to purchase a little temporary safety deserve neither liberty nor safety."
I have not heard that one before, but I like it.
I agree entirely with that statement.
Pretty stark, pretty harsh, pretty true.
Ben was right. Look what's happening.
Yeah, boy, that's the
What
truth.
are we defining as our essential liberty?
I mean, to me, that's the argument to keep AR-15s in people's hands.
Oh.
So I disagree with
that
that.
is interesting.
I don't
That
know.
kind of changes a few things, doesn't it?
That is a
this is
tough
complicated.
And Ben Franklin may have been on to something.
I want to agree, but then I think of my family and I wonder.
I don't know how I feel about that.
I don't like to think about giving up our rights. Mostly, I just like to mind my own business.
Mostly, so do the rest of us. What do you suppose our right means to that auto repairman in the grease-caked jeans who works in the garage on the corner? It means the right to crawl under that old Buick dragging a work light after him.
Joe, hand me that wrench.
What wrench?
The socket wrench on your feet. Right there. Where? I don't see no wrench. You blind? Where are you looking? No, behind you. Oh, well, why didn't you say so? Here you go. That's more like it.
Sure, that's America to Pete and Joe. The right to decide when to do a piston job, transmission job, oil change, what to charge for it, and where to go after work. And to Jane Prentice, who owns that Buick and lives down on the beach near the Coast Guard station, America means the right to enjoy the sound and the sight and the smell of high tide under the full moon. The age-old sound of the sea. The same sound folks are hearing right now, up around Penobscot Bay and Marblehead, on the Chincoteague Inlet, down in St. Bernard Parish and clean over to the west coast, by Guadeloupe and Carmel, all the way up beyond the offshore islands you can see from the Seattle Space Needle.
That sure is a lot of coastline, if you're talking about something to defend.
Well, look, folks, let's be honest about it. We can't build a wall around the whole country. And if we got to fight, it's a lot better to fight somewhere else over there than over here, isn't it?
I guess so.
That's what we're used to doing.
Yeah.
I
don't disagree. It's better to fight
to
it
protect our
somewhere
citizens,
else
yes.
than over here.
Have people coming in from other countries fighting a war on our land. That would go without saying.
Yeah, I guess so.
I'm afraid that's not what's happening.
Things have changed.
Well, I guess.
We are fighting over here. You can't avoid it anymore. Your computer is something to be attacked now.
That's a tough.
I would rather we work toward peace, but if we can't.
But does that mean America has to be the policeman of the world?
No.
I don't know.
Hell no.
No,
I don't think so.
It's not our job to tell people how they should be running their
Well,
lives.
not the policeman of the world, but the
I
model.
don't think that's a role anyone should have to take on.
Somebody's got to do it.
I mean, if the UN worked.
And it's usually us.
I don't
Right.
think it always
We can't
has to
just
be us.
stand
but
by and do nothing, can we?
sometimes it helps to step up and do the right
I
thing.
think
America has to set an example.
every country has the responsibility of policing themselves.
But we also should not allow human tragedy and human suffering to take place
Sometimes
when it doesn't have to.
Somebody has.
That is too much power.
Ah, darling, that job's too big for anyone, country. Even us.
It can't be just a single country acting like the cop on the beat. If we do it that way, one country becomes the big bully and the big target.
Yeah, that's right. Hey, mister.
Yes?
I know just what he means. When us kids are playing King of the Hill, if you try to stay up on top all by yourself, everybody just gangs up on you.
Yeah, it's a lot easier when you got a bunch of friends up there with you, isn't it?
It sure is.
But then how do you decide who wins?
Oh, well, after everybody finally gets on top, we all win.
He's right.
Look at it.
That's my boy.
Out of the mouth of babes.
Well, that seems awfully nice.
Well,
Bobby.
sometimes you have to help the little kids up.
That's right, son.
That's right.
Hey, I like the way this
Kids
kid
are
thinks.
smaller. They need a little boost up.
Did you hear what my son said?
Excuse me, but haven't we gotten off the track?
Huh?
So haven't really.
I suppose we have.
Come on.
Maybe she has a
Right. So serious.
Oh, I see what you mean.
Can you
Maybe we did.
elaborate on what you mean?
We've been learning from the past and worrying about the future. I mean, that's good and everything, but what about the present? We still haven't said what America is.
Yeah, she's right, you know.
Yeah, maybe you've got a point.
Oh, honey, the present's connected to the past.
You're
Good
so
point.
right.
Yeah, somebody had to say that.
Oh, yes. Okay.
Back to the big question.
If you weren't born here, or even if you were, how do you define America today? You don't do it by delving into one religion or another.
Now, wait a minute. Religion's always been a big part of American life.
So it has, in many forms. We've never even been able to count how many religions Americans have. And we've never needed to try, because our fundamental law guarantees everyone the right to believe and to worship peacefully in their own way. That's because religion was never intended to be part of American government. It was our founding fathers who put that in writing, using a feathered word processor. Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion. The first words of the first sentence of the first article of the Bill of Rights. No, America has never been defined by religion. So how do we define what we all want to defend? Have you ever asked yourself what America means to you? Does it mean 1776, Columbia, the gem of the ocean, the Statue of Liberty, Uncle Sam? Chances are it means none of these things. Chances are it means something very personal to each of you, something close to your heart that you'd miss like the very blazes if you were stranded abroad. It might have nothing at all to do with quotes from Madison or acts of Congress. It might mean a course in poetry at Harvard.
So it is clear that music was the key influence in what came to be called blues poetry. Now today, the influence of Langston Hughes on poets like Maya Angelou and Amanda Gorman can be seen in the rhythm of their phrasing and their choice of words.
Or it could be a poker game in Charlie Ferreter's office on a rainy afternoon.
See you and raise.
Oi, a little rich for my blood. I'll fold.
Or a skateboard and a clear stretch of sidewalk. Or the restaurant on the corner, or a catfish on the hook, or a song on the radio, or a great symphony orchestra playing the music of all the world's composers, including music tyrants tried and failed to forbid. Look, there are three things about America, three great things, which taken together make our nation unique. Americans all over the country can tell you about them. First, a geography teacher from Oregon.
We are a large country, third largest in the world. Did you know that? Americans tend to grow up taking, well, call it a wide perspective.
Well, why don't I come up and meet you for lunch? I'll drive up today. It's only about 100 miles.
Second, a businessman from a small town in the Midwest.
Aside from Native Americans, of course, most of us have not descended from people who lived on this ground for many centuries, like the vast billions in other lands. Instead, we are descended from people who embraced change, who rejoiced in the future, whatever their past may have been, who left birthplaces in every land to stand on new ground.
Is it an accident that hundreds of millions of people all around the world would give everything they own to be in your shoes, a free citizen of this country, right this very minute? It's no accident. It's the third of those three great things. Ask an office worker from the East Coast.
It's our system of government, a system that enables all of us to get along better than any other diverse population has been able to anywhere else in the world. I'm talking about representative democracy. You know, things like elections with secret ballots and an honest count, habeas corpus, trial by jury, freedom of speech, freedom of religion, the common law, the Constitution, the Bill of Rights, those things. They're the gold in the streets that people come here to find.
How else can you explain Frenchmen and Germans, Hindus and Muslims, Catholics and Protestants, Serbs and Croats, Arabs and Jews, all living in the same society without killing each other, living as neighbors instead of deadly enemies? How else can you explain the fact of more than 300 million people trying to live up to the ideals and expectations of a handful of great men who lived and died over 200 years ago? Men who were so fed up with the kind of government they'd been getting that they stood up for their rights and then sat down and wrote a new constitution for themselves and their children, a democratic constitution. Unfortunately, we don't always live up to that document.
Yeah, there's always some people trying to chisel pieces off the Constitution.
And there's others who try to twist it and turn it like the devil, quoting the scriptures to his own purpose.
True enough. There's some graft and greed and intolerance and lies and bigotry in our country, and a lot of things there shouldn't be. But we people, by and large, are still trying to live by the rules. Some of the best rules we've seen around, ever. Of course, there are other things that make our union such a good one to belong to. It's a beautiful country, even though it has a lot of incorrigible badlands and corrigible slums. Aren't many countries have as much in them to look at and wonder about as this one.
Cape Cod in the Sierra Nevada.
Gloucester and Death Valley.
Old Orchard and the Great Plains.
Mount Rushmore and Mammoth Cave.
Williamsburg and Yosemite.
Hot Springs in Georgia and geysers at Yellowstone.
The Florida Keys and the Grand Canyon.
The Mississippi.
And the Hudson.
And the Columbia.
In the final analysis, there can be no analysis. Many a great thinker and poet has attempted it, but the country's too big for any one person. There's Walt Whitman and Willa Cather and Tom Wolfe, and they all felt the magnitude and magnificence of the great nation. They felt it and wrote about it in unforgettable ways. But still, it's bigger than any of them, or any of us. Whitman hit it on the nose when he said it was bigger than the president and his cabinet and the District of Columbia. It's not just Park Avenue or Broadway or the Loop or the Strip or the Golden Triangle. It's other things. Many, many, many other things.
Steel towns.
Farm towns.
Mining towns.
Wind farms.
Ranch houses.
Railroad siding.
Motels along the interstate.
18-wheelers.
Computers.
Kettles of sorghum molasses.
Gas stations.
Sunday papers.
Season tickets.
Airports.
Daycare.
Night courts.
Radios.
Toothpaste.
Television.
Factories.
Dogs.
Cats.
Video games.
Skyscrapers.
Guitars.
Solar panels.
Cemeteries.
Subways.
Cornfields.
Offices.
Docks.
Hospitals.
Oh, we could go on for weeks with this and never come any closer to a working definition of America. How can you add up all the neon signs, the smell of all the bacon and eggs frying in the morning, the bargain specials, the homework assignments, the businesses opening their doors, the cows let in from the pasture, the mileage clocked up on odometers, the rainfall and the snowfall and the wind drift? It's much too great for any person or any party, too much loved by all its people, loved in spite of and because of its faults and virtues and its past mistakes and future promises. America is not a map, a poem, a post of legionnaires, an almanac, a mural, proud towers in New York, or a building in the heart of Washington. It's a territory, possessed by people possessed by an ideal. Well, that's all, listeners. Just wanted to talk between Americans for a little while. No big finish here, no brass section bringing down the curtain. Just a little music to separate me from the announcer, who follows with the closing announcement.
You've been listening to Between Americans, an informal program for informal listeners, originally written and directed in 1941 by Norman Corwin, and updated for the 21st century by Norman Corwin and Richard Fish, with additional insights from Emily Labus, Orson Osman, and members of the cast and of the National Audio Theater Festivals. It was produced, directed, edited, and mastered by Richard Fish, with music created by Chris Holmes. Sound effects were coordinated by Tony Brewer. Voices were recorded by Rex Hunt and members of the cast. Visual effects were created by Tom Curley. Tom Tiggleman and Preston Osman gave technical assistance. Our assistant producer was Tom Dukeman, and Phil Proctor served as associate producer. Heard in the program were the voices of Liraldo Anzaldúa, Tony Brewer, Beverly Callender Anderson, Kristen Campbell Proctor, Gladys Devane, Tom Dukeman, Helen Engelhardt, Richard Fish, Roel Gorman, Bill Govey, Rex Hunt, Adeline Jones, Dan Lynn, Jason Lopez, Emily McGee, DeAndre Means, Robin Miles, Nathan Morris, Orson Osman, Stephanie Park, Melinda Peterson, Phil Proctor, Barbara Rosenblatt, Gary Sandy, Roy Sillings, George Tirebiter, Isidore James Torrey, and Yolanda Valdivia. The principal role was performed by David Osman. This production was made possible by funding from the National Audio Theater Festivals, Helen Engelhardt, and Tom Dukeman, and special thanks are due to Judith Walcott, the Civic Theater of Monroe County, Indiana, and Russell McGee. I'm Richard Fish. Thank you very much for listening.